Greetings, travelers. Misshapen Chair here, the one who likes the story of Final Fantasy XIV and wants the gameplay to be fun too. I know, I only want the game to be my version of perfect in every way with no flaws whatsoever. It only needs the best gameplay, the best story, the best encounter design, the best art, the best graphics, the best music, and the best cat girls. And if anything is out of line, the whole game is bad and has not a single aspect that I like about it. Yes, it is once again time for me to provide negative feedback, which I did long before it was cool, and unlike those posers, I am a real, certified hater, so I will still be hating even after the Dawn Trail hypebeast starts default dancing and placating the masses with his hot and sexy new Viper job. Contrary to unpopular belief, I don't want to spend my entire video-making career critiquing a game like a strict parent who has an incredibly high set of standards for their talented child, but applies a different set of standards to everybody else. No. I'm here to stir the pot without knowing how to cook. Today's mid-core commentary video is going to start with something completely outside of Final Fantasy XIV. So buckle up, sit down, wear some protective eyewear, and get your hand on that spacebar, because it's gonna be a long video to react and respond to in real time on your live stream. I used to play an anime card game. Odds are you've never heard of it. It's called Weiss Schwarz, a German-named Japanese card game featuring sets from popular visual novels like Grisaya and Da Capo and Guilty Gear Strive. There is no Nekopara set, so it is a bad game. Shoulda played Precious Memories. It is a very stupid luck-based card game because it's played in a best-of-one format even in the World Tournament. Since it is all probability, if you make the highest percentage play, you will get punished, and if your opponent makes the lowest percentage play, they're going to be rewarded. It's just Gambler's Fallacy the game, where the only way to be right 100% of the time is to cheat. So as we would say, if you win, it luck, if I win, it skill. Why do I bring this up? I play in a local community sometimes. If you see me in my poorly fitting Nekopara t-shirt, I ask that you respectfully leave me and my receding hairline alone. Now, I am one of these obnoxious types who likes to get invested in game mechanics and attempt to improve play over the course of many failures. It is only one of my many character flaws, that I like to get better at pointless games and pointless skills that do not have real-world applications and therefore do not increase business revenue, and therefore have no real-world value. I was very bad at the game when I first played. I know that's a very big shock, because I am not a genius or exceptionally talented at anything. I also never played a trading card game before, which is a pretty significant debuff. So when I first strolled in with my 4-year out-of-date Project Diva deck made out of a frayed shoelace and a single iodine tablet, I got my ass handed to me. I was completely shocked by the exact thing that I expected. Weiss Schwarz is typically played in the Neo Standard format, which means deck building can only use cards from the same Neo Standard series. So, my old-ass Project Diva cards could only be played with Project Diva cards, and not combined with other music sets that had some cards that might actually be playable. See what I just did right there? Character flaw number 2. I do like to win games once in a while. When I play with my local community, there are different archetypes of players, from casual to competitive. You could call it a spectrum. Everyone loves spectrum analogies, right? Just like how everything is a difficulty slider in every video game. When you really think about it, using your knowledge of mechanics to win instead of just raw reflexes is easy mode. With my major gripe in terminology aside, the spectrum analogy can help people understand that nuance exists. In my opinion, a pure competitive player is someone who plays to win. Nothing else in the game matters. Only winning. A pure casual player is someone who plays for fun and doesn't care about the outcome of the game whatsoever. Casual players are usually motivated by something as simple as, I just want to play my big card that gets lots of power, which is very useful in a game where dealing damage to your opponent has nothing to do with your card's power and everything to do with its soul. Just watch that one ProZD skit about cows and all of this will make sense. It's very rare for someone to be 100% certified purely casual or 100% certified purely competitive. And I am not a psychologist, so I don't want to pretend like this theory is certified. It's not, by the way. From my anecdotal experience, people who play silly stuff usually want to win a game once in a while, and competitive players have their limits for how far they're willing to go, because cheating is probably against most moral compasses, despite what some people attempt to extrapolate from my extremely straightforward exposition. I do not hate casual players of any game. At least, not my definition of one. There is another type of player, though. One who spends all of their time losing and then turns around and says, "Man, I hate this game. I just want to have fun, but I can't win." That's not right. Not in my worldview, because that's not what it means to play for fun. If winning is what you define as fun, then guess what, dickhead? You don't play for fun, you play to win. So, theoretical player who wants to win to have fun, what do you want to do to get better? Nah, man. That's work, and that's not fun. Thus, my least favorite kind of player, Traveler. I don't hate you personally, but I do despise your mentality, which is an important distinction because you can have a terrible mindset and still volunteer at animal shelters on the weekend and help old ladies cross the street. I am more than willing to help players who want to improve and come up with better strategies and analyze the 2 plays in the game that actually matter because 90% are inconsequential. But a player who hasn't put in the same amount of effort to improve their play should not expect to just win. That would be fucking stupid, right? This extends into the realm of growth mindset, as I'm sure anyone has heard at some corporate meeting while passing out in their seat being forced to listen to the good old double good morning volume check. Ugh. More terminology that's been tainted. If you want to start winning at something, you have to start improving at it. It's fine to not want to put in a bunch of additional effort, just don't expect to win. There are extra layers of bullshit on top of this, especially in a game as luck-dependent as Weiss Schwarz, where you have to make the most probable play, get obliterated, and say, "I did the best thing based on the knowledge that I had available. Therefore, it was the right play, even though I lost because of it." It is also not just about raw time investment. It has to be about making improvements over that time, because practicing the same segment over and over again while making the exact same mistake is just a waste of time, when if you had just played it slow the first time and slowly worked up, everything would have been so much more efficient, but you couldn't accept that reality. You couldn't accept that you had to build up fundamentals first. Practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. Remember when this was a video about Final Fantasy XIV? Greetings, casual Final Fantasy XIV players. I don't hate you. In fact, we are all probably more in agreement than you might think. If you are a real and true casual Final Fantasy XIV player, you don't care about burst windows, or raid buff alignment, or uptime strats. That shit should mean nothing to you. And if you do care about that stuff, even a tiny bit, you are not a purely casual player. Please change your adjective to something else to stop tarnishing the reputation of real casuals. Sure, I might be a little miffed when a player doesn't AoE the trash pulls or hit the boss while playing healer in a boring dungeon that's going to take 5 minutes longer because expecting someone to roll a single DPS button rotation is toxic. That's character flaw number 3, by the way. But I'll get over it. I've carried so many borderline AFK players through content I can't even count, and I won a math competition in the 3rd grade. A lot of casual players are usually more invested in the story, so as long as that's good, they are happy. That is not the only motivator to play the game, but since Final Fantasy XIV is narrative-driven, it is not uncommon. From the gameplay side of things, casual satisfaction comes in the form of something like, "I just like Big Button. Akmorn go burr. It's so much stronger than Revelation, which has the exact same potency." Hardcore satisfaction comes in the form of something like, "I refreshed my Higanbana at 17 seconds remaining to get another stack of Shoha and better align it with the downtime window and managed to crank out another 7 DPS. As things get changed, it is hilarious to see who blames who. The hardcore players go, "Oh, those stupid casuals, they want the game to be easy and dumb. That's why this mechanic was removed." Then the casuals go, "Oh, those stupid raiders, they want the game to be boring and samey. That's why this mechanic was removed." When in reality, both groups are actually not the intended recipients of these glorious gameplay changes. So, to answer my question from well over a year ago, who are these changes intended for? Mid-core players. Bam, another buzzword for the video. Probably not the exact middle, but somewhere on that spectrum. The only way anyone cares about a job's rotation to begin with is if they have an actual awareness of what a rotation even is. But really, I would say the biggest offenders are my good old, least favorite type of Weiss Schwarz player. The one who wants to be good, but hates having to put any amount of additional effort into doing so. I am not very kind and accepting to these types of people, so I usually demean them as shitters. Once you become aware of the shitter mindset, the actions and requests of complainers start to make a little bit of sense. They practice a rotation on a training dummy. That's what they know best. Having to adjust that to run an ultimate fight? Bad game design. Practice the melee rotation that requires moving cooldowns around to adjust for downtime? Bad fight design. Having a cast drop because they fucked up their movement? Bad game feel. Because every single little tiny thing that requires any modicum of additional effort or is slightly outside of the exact scenario that they practice is frustrating and wasting their time to get to the end result that they desire. Probably a shiny weapon in a title if I had to take a gander. That's reason number 14 for why I destroy those worthless things, and character flaw number 4. That's only one aspect of the game to be a shitter about. I see the same mindset brought on by parsing, where somehow the players who care most about metagame performance and optimized rotations aren't even in the top 5% of the fake leaderboards that aren't officially supported by the game. It's so fucking stupid that the real speed killers and patters know that it's not tantamount to standardized play, but the people who want to be them so bad decide they need to optimize the fun out of everything. You can find this mentality anywhere. I swear it's like a universal constant. Final Fantasy XIV has historically managed the different interests of players by trying to keep everything siloed. If you want a job that dynamically gets skills, that's what Blue Mage and probably the new limited job are for. They, as in the design team, don't want to balance that for current raid content. That's why it's limited. That's why it's siloed. It's still possible to break the game with raw abilities or raw stats. It's just limited to old content. If these things intersected, it would get very heated very quickly. If you needed to win a bunch of Mahjong games to unlock the gambler job, you bet your ass it would be a bad time for some people. This is why cross-classing was a pain point for many players, because you couldn't have one max level job to raid. Instead, you needed to make sure you had unlocked all the additional mandatory cross-class skills in a version of the game where it took significantly longer to level. As someone with everything at max level and who this wouldn't personally affect, fuck cross-classing. That shit was dumb as fuck. In concept, it's pretty cool though. But to make cross-class skills worth using, they have to be useful, and by being useful, they become necessary, and when it's necessary, it can't be siloed. So, they have tried to preserve some of that creativity, but away from the core gameplay. I am not claiming that the current system is perfect, but if you strongly miss the days of cross-classing and have refused to touch limited jobs, maybe you'll have fun with it. I've heard people saying that E12S on Blue Mage is one of their favorite fights in the game. It does bring up the question of why do people want busted shit to be allowed in current content? Probably so that all the grinding and time spent unlocking everything means they get to be stronger than the people who didn't. They want a numerical reward for all of that time investment, where I believe that the current system rewards players for investing time into being mechanically proficient and comfortable on the jobs. It is better to be good at a suboptimal job than to be mediocre at an optimal one. Your time is best spent getting better at the actual game itself and not grinding out some tedious bullshit to get the highest damage advantage for raiding. As long as you ignore highly optimized ultimate raiding gear sets where I grinded the new dungeon like 100 times. But once again, ultimate raiding is siloed and kept away from the core of Final Fantasy XIV. Clearly this design choice is just a key part of the ultimate fight torture machine. But all of this siloing comes at a cost. That cost is actual raiding and casual Final Fantasy XIV being completely different games. The jobs might be the same, but the fundamentals are not. Casual Final Fantasy XIV requires nothing more than admiring the scent of the dirt that some bunny girl just stepped on, while hardcore raiding requires 4 brain cells, 2 of which are active. Now, that is still an undefined amount of times more brain power than anything required by casual. The barrier of entry to Savage isn't just that you'll have to do mechanics, it's that you will be punished if you don't know how to do damage whatsoever. It often exposes players who never put in rotational work before and never rolled their GCD on a healer. When this happens, a little phenomenon occurs. They experience the frustration of realizing that there is an entire wall that they have to scale before they are ready. This can cause them to give up before they even start. There isn't some magical rope that can be thrown down that they're going to immediately grab onto. Yes, plenty of guides and tutorials exist, but people have to consciously decide to try. It's a choice between innocent, ignorant button mashing and conscious, controlled button mashing. I don't want people to listen to me say this and think that Savage is unimaginably hard. It's not. And some dickheads take DPS way too fucking far. You don't have to be a god. But if a player is unwilling to learn how to play a job decently, you're telling me they're gonna learn everything necessary to clear a tier on release? If only there was content in the game they could participate in that didn't require any of that. At the end of the day, the jobs are the same. They operate on the same core. That's why they can never be completely siloed from each other. There have been a plethora of gameplay changes over the years. Some changes that people hate are absolutely intended for casual players. TP management causing people to bottom out and not be able to click buttons is one, but aggro management is probably the biggest offender. Yes, it was basically only a single button to manage. Yes, it was Ninja's super cool and sexy raid utility, and I am not going to tell you that it was hard. But the casual content in this game is designed for players to be able to fall asleep on their keyboards and still complete it. If that is the goal, this might sound dumb, but yes, asking a DPS or a healer to do the thing that would cause them not to rip aggro and die is asking too much of a comatose patient. And I could tell you that Final Fantasy XIV's bad tutorials certainly don't help newer players understand the fundamentals to the casual game, but the casual game is designed around people who won't read or actively participate in those anyway. You know what isn't a change targeting casual players in casual content? Anything to do with damage rotations. Any of it. Even things like changing AoE shapes. Oh, would you look at that? It's time to talk about the 2-minute metagame for 2 minutes. It's hard to understand if you didn't play back in the good old days that are clouded by my nostalgia. But jobs used to have a large variety of timers for raid buffs and cooldowns. The most common were 2 minutes and 3 minutes, but Ninja had a 1-minute raid buff, and Monk had a 90-second buff, and Bard had a whack-ass personal 80-second timer. Dot timings could be like 24 seconds long, and Dragoon, whew, that was the timer job. That shit had a 90-second, a 2-minute, and a 3-minute buff timer. I could go on and on, but I think you kinda get the idea. In terms of raid buffs, everything would line up at the start of the fight, and then it got a little wild and wacky depending on team comp. The crazy thing is, if everybody was on point, 6 minutes into the raid, everything lined up again, unless you were a bard. And then there was another glorious full burst window with pots. It usually wasn't perfectly lined up, but it was cool. However, this wasn't good enough. People complained that not every single job super synergized with each other. Monk and Dancer, for example, wouldn't have their buffs lined up perfectly. So unfortunately, Monk was the completely dogshit, worthless third optimal dance partner, because raid buff alignment isn't the only thing that contributes to raid DPS. In spite of that fact, people still believed in this buff alignment falsehood and said that it felt bad, and it would feel so much better if everything lined up. Endwalker's gameplay is the end result of spoiling the person who wants to eat dessert and slam drinks every single night. It is possible to have too much of a good thing. Everything lining up once every 6 minutes was exhilarating, but when it happens every 2 minutes, it doesn't feel very special. I would also argue that jobs that super synergized felt cooler together because it wasn't just the default behavior. Did this system have consequences at the top level? Abso-fucking-lutely. Speed kill groups and parse parties would only run the best comps for specific fights, and only take jobs that super synergize with each other. The thing is, none of these jobs were actively unviable. They were just suboptimal. For speed killing and parse runs, regardless of what some players try to convince the entire world of, From my experience, I never saw clear parties or prog parties restricting specific jobs, and those that did were dragged through the mud and flamed into infinity. Clearly, the people who actually clear this content don't have a problem. In this spread out, wacky timer metagame without the damage types of Eld, the balancing was fine. But it wasn't the easiest balancing act, so changing it would make it simpler on the designers. Surely, an Endwalker Savage DPS check wouldn't be overtuned to make suboptimal jobs legitimately unviable for a couple of weeks in this simplified 2-minute metagame. I could make a whole video dedicated to the fact that actual numbers do not matter. All that matters is the players feeling like those numbers matter, because game design is just one big experiment in psychology. Just like how people complaining about big buttons not critting is just because seeing a bigger number will make them feel like they're contributing more, and not because it actually mathematically matters. Sometimes I wonder if they just made it look like those buttons crit, but it didn't actually, people would shut the fuck up. I can see how people can come to these conclusions. At a surface level interpretation, all buffs lining up would synergize better, but it falls apart when realizing that not every single job has enormous cooldowns to slam into that 2-minute burst window to take full advantage of it. Counterintuitively, it's also more punishing when stuff doesn't line up perfectly. It's also more punishing to die around a 2-minute burst window specifically. You can have like 4 deaths right after a burst window and still meet the DPS check, but lose 1 tank during a buff window and fail. On top of this, jobs that have more evenly distributed DPS benefit from things being less constrained and more spread out. This can all be fixed. It is just numbers. All that would have to be done is just make these jobs strictly do more damage. So it's a good thing that they did that and didn't rework any of them into something burst-oriented. Homogeneity. Bam! I used a different part of speech for that word. I'm really glad the community has homogenized the term homogenization, but I am very unique. I prefer the term samey. All jobs of their respective archetypes feel very samey. This was actively cheered on by some people, but not just shitters. It's players who play multiple jobs but really only prefer to play one. Also known as most people who play the game. Take me for example. I might like Samurai. If other jobs were made to play like Samurai, I would like them more. I would. The thing is I know I'm not going to like every job in the game equally. I'm a Reaper disliker, but you know what's crazy? I don't want to like it. I want it to be its own thing. I want it to be fun for those who do like it. Some things are not popular with the majority of players. But is that inherently a bad thing? Is that an indication that something is seriously wrong? Just because a job isn't everyone's favorite doesn't mean it's not someone's favorite. The people who are most dedicated to that job at the top or lowest level certainly don't want it to go away. So, I'm also a certified paladin hater, but watching it get changed to play like all the other tanks? I can't help but feel like something was lost. Instead, it needed to appeal to people who played the other 3 tanks because I guess they didn't have enough options. Don't worry though, Paladin shitters. I saw you all complaining about the insane number of down for the count inflicting tank busters in DSR, which I know is impossible to keep up with all 1 of them. 2 of them if you count the door boss that nobody counts for anything else in DSR. How were the Paladin players with their weak and pitiful DPS going to clear the big downtime phases like Thornton, which are only the easiest DPS checks in the whole fucking fight? If only the biggest downtime ultimate phase known as Bahamut was still a meme in a much less balanced version of the game. If only the fights were designed so that the hardest DPS checks were in full uptime scenarios where the game is most balanced. If only the hardest mechanics were at the beginning of each ultimate phase, so that skipping mechanics with optimized comps in the easy DPS checks wasn't relevant. If only the hardest fights in the game were designed with all of this in mind. Yes, some jobs are more optimal in certain circumstances, but I strongly argue that that is totally okay as long as the other jobs are not impossible to clear with. It is not the game itself that prevents people from playing them. It's the players who believe that it actually matters. It helps if jobs have places where they shine, but for that to happen, fights and jobs have to have some flexibility with their design and cause some jobs to be slightly better or worse in certain circumstances. Before I get everyone more riled up and continue practicing my name calling and working on all of my very creative insults, there's something I'm seriously ignoring in all of this discussion. Players should be able to voice their complaints and vent their frustrations, even if their complaints are completely illogical and invalid, because the players are not the ones responsible for designing the game. The designers clearly have an idea of what they want the game to be, and I would rather them focus their efforts on making that game, unless they want to take away my conal AoE. It is impossible to make every single player 100% happy with 100% of every little detail in the game. Some jobs aren't for some people, some whole role archetypes aren't for some people, some mechanics aren't fun for some people, and some games just aren't for some people. There's no magical fantasy land where the game exists and not a single person on the planet doesn't voice a complaint about something. That's not a failure on the game, but a failure on both the designers and the players who are unable to accept that reality. You've probably heard the quote that players are good at pointing out problems, but not making solutions. There is some truth in that statement, but that would also imply that the majority of the player base thinks something is a problem in the first place. I didn't exactly see a poll, and it's not like there was input from every single player on the entire planet when implementing these changes. Yoshi P says that players asked for it. I'm sure that some did, but I wasn't one of them. I called these people losers for asking for these changes, so don't lump me into that statement. I am now part of the players asking for it back category, and as far as I can tell, I am my own person. I didn't magically shift from one camp to the other, but even then, people can change their opinions and viewpoints. They can also admit that they thought it was a good idea until they were proven wrong. It's called growing as a person. Perhaps this players who complain group comes from forum feedback, in which case complaints would be significantly higher than they were in the past, but the player base is so much larger that the raw number of complaints would be significantly higher. I have my doubts that the percentage of complainers has significantly gone up, and if it has, I would like to see some real, hard data, and not just all of us making broad statements towards this ephemeral idea of players who complain, because honestly, I don't even know who these people are. Even in an expansion where a Savage fight was overtuned and required some adjustments, even in an expansion where some jobs were convincingly unviable in said fight, I still see the overwhelming majority of players allowing them in their groups and understanding that it doesn't matter 99.99% of the time. Because good players can practically make anything work. So wherever these complainers are, they aren't playing the game and they aren't trying to get any better. I beat DSR with 2 fucking Fizz ranged and a Red Mage in my party before the totally necessary Red Mage buffs because the job was totally unplayable and needed mega buffs or else you were trolling your group. But that fight's DPS check is just a cakewalk. I gotta beat TOP, specifically loading screen, with a Dancer, a Bard, a Red Mage, and 2 old Paladins, and then I might finally have a valid opinion for once in my life. However, even in this fantasy land of perfect feedback, even if the majority of players are in agreement about something, the majority opinion is usually the safest, and the safest design tends to be the most mediocre, to paraphrase the words of many others. I complain about the lack of creative risks, and 100% designing around every complaint leads to this extreme mediocrity. Takes one to know one. Parts of the game are frustrating. That's why it's okay for people to complain. But in order for some parts of the jobs to be cathartic, it requires something a little clunky, a little awkward, or a little inconvenient to overcome. Trying to remove every petty frustration the game has at every part of its design does not make it better. It makes it boring. You cannot completely remove frustration because it always exists. I should not have to point out how ironic this is in the face of Endwalker's plotline. If I had to take a guess, these decisions are probably forced by people who want to make the game as broadly appealing and make the most money possible. Because creators, astonishingly, want to be creative, I'm not surprised when Naoki Yoshida and Yoshi P both say they would like to add some wackiness back into the game, because they added it there in the first place. Just like how Reaper has unique AoE patterns that I'm sure some players are complaining about. So, I have to ask, what's the most fun version of the game to you? Yoshi P and everyone else involved in the development process, because it's not just one person who makes the game? And don't deflect and say it's just whatever the player base wants. There has to be a reason for why someone designed it that way in the first place, because I don't think any game is designed by just spinning a roulette wheel. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to your fan base ever, because of this thing called nuance. Even after talking about the majority opinion and groups of players and not listening to feedback, I am probably in the minority of people who do not like the current state of the game. Final Fantasy XIV is still loved and played by a huge amount of people, regardless of players like me. They are most likely indifferent towards these changes, and I can accept that. Although, if they are indifferent, that means they don't really have a stake in the matter whatsoever, now do they? I know that I'm not going to love 100% of everything in the game. I do not think the current state is bad. I would say it is just plain fine. Or is it? Using an emote on a boss and getting a unique mechanic, time loop being flashy and being the only fight in the game that you can keep cycling as many times as you want in one pull, dynamis passes. There's still a lot of fun and stupid shit being added to the game all the time. I do think there are some missed opportunities, like not going hard in pushing Criterion dungeons, or not including Neo Exodeth or God Kefka in TOP, but it's not like that fight's missing creative elements. Sometimes I think stuff is a bit misplaced. Saving Haurchefant doesn't feel right as part of an ultimate raid because the players who care about that the most are mostly invested in the story, which is not something universal to all raiders, but I also kinda like that at the same time. If all special ultimate mechanics were just throwbacks to the old raiding community, it would alienate new players. But it's cool to toss them a bone once in a while anyway, just like how Living Liquid is the first phase of T. It would have been even funnier if Faust showed up and was just a big DPS check in that fight. Alchemy was really fucking cool as I watched from the sidelines. There are still things that push boundaries and force players to approach the game differently than what they are used to. Sure, some players complain when that happens, but I don't think it's the majority. I think that the fight design of this expansion is still pretty good on the overall. I like that arenas can be more dynamic thanks to making buffs have a larger range at the cost of invalidating some earlier fights. Just put the tether back on Dragonsight. DSR is hands down my favorite ultimate fight. Currently, I might change my mind as I complete some other ones. I just want to see some of that wackiness and creativity with the core gameplay as well. It almost strikes me as irrational to say that, but when I played this game the most, the jobs were so fun to engage with because they had that unique sauce, forcing you to play the game differently and learn a different set of skills, while still being approachable at the most basic level, on top of providing an avenue to push the game way beyond what is expected of the average player. As a result, every fight felt like a blast no matter how boring it was, no matter the player's skill level. Now, every fight feels like a step down by comparison, even though, like I just said, the fights themselves are still good. But I also have stupidly high standards, because I know Final Fantasy XIV can do better and isn't living up to its potential. If you want to know where I would personally put the line of ideal flavor and spice, I would put it somewhere between Shadowbringers and Stormblood. That's probably the best mix of accessibility and complexability. That's not going to be good enough for Heavensward boomers, but it is more than enough for me, because I don't think putting like 2 more DPS buttons on healers is going to brick the game. Shadow Flare had a cool animation that made me rock hard, just like Arrow 3. See, I like it when Big Button go brrr too. Why do you think I like Samurai so much? Especially when those big buttons did 50% more damage. But who am I kidding? Obviously, the best version of the game is the most feature-dense and most complicated, so once again, 1.0 is the best version of the game. Bring back momentum, baby, and put a parkour segment in an ultimate fight and whip out those duty actions and raids. That'll piss off the players who want everything to be boring. One last thing before I go. It's very easy to be a shitter. It's much harder to try to make improvements. That doesn't mean you don't get frustrated, it means you push through in spite of it. However, even I know that something being difficult and annoying doesn't automatically make it good. but it doesn't automatically make it bad either. Every change that has simplified the game isn't awful, and every change that makes the game more complicated isn't better. Guess you could say it's like a
But Chair, what kind of player are you?
What a stupid fucking question. I'm a mid-core player, obviously. That's why mid-core content is whatever I personally run. Now let's get out there and please, just hit the boss when there's nothing to heal. I swear it's not that bad. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. You must be very dedicated or very bored while putting me on your second monitor. That's why I'm going to torture you with a self-promotion advert. Like my Project Zomboid content, subscribe for more. Or by signing up for my Patreon, you can help me spend 8 hours a day working on drama videos. A genuine thank you to all my premium supporters. I know it can be hard to tell when I'm serious, but it means a lot to me.